We're going back in time to investigate events that take place after episode 1. It's a planet that Qui-Gon almost died on, but then he sends Mace Windu there with an after-death message. What actually happens? Let's dive in. Hey YouTube, welcome to the Force Feed. I'm John, and this cold has not gone away. I am really sorry, but we're gonna get through this again. Today we're reviewing a book called Star Wars Mace Windu Glass Abyss. It's a brand new book. It just came out like a month ago, and it takes place in 32 BBY, and it was written by Stephen Barnes. From what I know, nowhere in the movies does this planet exist. We do get to talk about Mace Windu's home planet, and they investigate a lot of things that have to do with Mace Windu's past, so it is interesting in that respect. Story does seem a little contrived though, and we'll get into more about what I think after we talk about the interesting things in this book. Before I go further, if you wanted to read this book before you see what I think about it, there will be a link in the description for this book as well as the next 3 books that I'll be reviewing on this channel. Now, there's been some mix-ups with Wikipedia because that is where I get my list of books to read for this channel, and it seems like the chronological order of the books has been changed, and so I made my next books to reflect what was originally there. So I'm now going to start reflecting the change that was made. So there are different books that are coming up next, but still books I would have read anyway. I read a couple of books early, whatever, doesn't matter. But if you choose to use those links to purchase the books, just keep in mind that I am an Amazon affiliate, so it will benefit my channel or me in some way. I really appreciate it if you do support me, but don't do it for that. Do it so we can continue this awesome conversation. And don't forget, please, to like the video and subscribe to my channel if you like the content that you see today. Basically, what happens is, in the past, Qui-Gon would protect a people called the Sayad. It's a clan of people that live on Metagos, which is a really crazy planet. It's something that has these bad sunstorms, I believe it was, that turn everything into glass that's on the surface. So crazy. He basically went there to protect them against the crime lords that live on this planet that take advantage of a silk that's really strong silk that if you process it, it can be very expensive on the open market. And it's produced by, I think they were called Hylians. They are like worm-like creatures that produce this silk. You have to sing to them, and then they produce it if they like the song that you're singing. So there's 2 crime lords that take place in the book. There's Chulak, which is a fused being. It's a Rodian and a Farakai being. They fused because they felt that this power would be so overwhelming that they could use it to enrich themselves, basically. They refer to him as they instead of he or she, since it's 2 people. They are very formidable, and they consider themselves Jedi killer. And they actually believe they killed Qui-Gon, but Qui-Gon escaped, obviously, and died later to somebody else. But the other crime lord is Sybil, which is a Rurian, which is kind of like a mix between a hellfire maggot and a demon centipede. She has like a ton of babies, like over 300, and they scour the planet of Metagos doing her bidding, keeping people in control, so on and so forth. They work in concert with Chulak, but they're 2 different crime lords. They don't work for each other or with each other. It didn't seem like that they were at odds, but they certainly don't work together. So Mace, when he visits the planet, he has to create a new persona. He basically has to go undercover. So he takes on the persona Solver, and just a random run-of-the-mill name to suggest I solve problems, basically, because the crime lords there will not welcome him with open arms if they know that he's a Jedi. So he tries to go incognito and to hide his Jedi aura, if you will. He eventually infiltrates both of the ranks of Chulak's ranks and Sybil's ranks, and is able to perform tasks for each of them so that he can find out how each crime lord operates and find out how he can break up their control to free up the Sayad people. Eventually, he is able to get the Sayad people to fight against them, and he also releases what are called the Depth Dwellers, that are these fungi-infested beings that are behind this gate that are in the 7th level of below the planet, and he releases them, and they attack Chulak's forces and Sybil's forces. Eventually, they come out on top. Mace Windu and Chulak have a fight with one another. Chu was in favor of continuing the fight, whether they die or not, and Locke was not in favor of that, wanted to call it a draw and escape. So because of their discordant attitudes towards the fight, they basically wanted to be unfused, and I think Chu was trying to do that. Mace eventually is able to do it with his lightsaber, and they just separate and go on their separate ways, with Mace defeating the Jedi killer that challenged Qui-Gon before. There's a few things that show up in this book. I wanted to see if it showed up in other books or if they are debuted in this book. And generally with new books nowadays, I've noticed the ones that I've read that have come out this year very recently, they all debut new things. Not a lot of them talk about old things, and which is good. They want to include new material. As I've said before, the struggle and the difficulty with introducing new things is you need to figure out how to do it while framing it in the context of what has already happened. You have to ask yourself, if this happened or this was here, where was this person when this was happening in the original canon storyline? As long as it can flow according to the author, then everything's good. If you can explain how it flows, there's no problem. Sometimes it becomes difficult when you keep introducing new things within 1 year of things have been defined in Legends, which I know they're not interested in meshing with Legends. You have to imagine that they want to somehow be cohesive with it. And I feel like Lucasfilms have tried to do a good job somewhat with making sure that Legends aren't completely destroyed in terms of you can't pull from it anymore. A lot of it still meshes pretty good, so you can still cherry pick from it. So the first thing is I wanted wanted to see if any fused beings show up in other books, and I have not seen anything. I did a quick search. I did not see any other book that contains fused beings. There were fused holocrons, Jedi and Sith holocrons, but this was the first book that introduced that concept. And actually, at one point in the book, Chulak was so impressed with Mace that they wanted to invite Mace to be a third fusion to create this ultimate super being because he's an awesome Jedi. And he obviously declined them, but with this idea that they could ritualistically fuse together was really interesting. And they also had a connection with the Force, which the people on Metagos call the Web. I can imagine it's not called that anywhere else, but I'm straying away. Don't see another book with fused beings. Harun Kal is the planet that Mace Windu was born on. This actually is defined in Legends as well, so canon is continuing that tradition and making it definitive as part of the canon storyline. He goes through a few situations where he's talking about his childhood and he's trying to figure out, did his parents give him up or did he choose the Jedi? Exactly how did he come upon the Jedi? He wanted to make sure that the choice was not forced on him, that he was the one who chose it, which he eventually realized that he did. Harun Kal, it's a planet that is mostly covered in toxic gas, which was brought up by volcanic activity. There's like oceans of it, basically. I don't know how people would survive on the planet. Maybe there's other things that they can survive on, which is neither here nor there, but this is the planet that Mace Windu is canonically from now. Rurians, as I mentioned before, is a hellfire centipede that exists in this book and is also brought up in a couple other canon storylines. There was a comic book that it showed up in called Doctors Alpha, I think it was. And there was a book that was written in 2014. I forget the name of the book, but that mentioned this species as well. Not too many books that interesting species. And the last thing are the Metagosans, which Metagos I don't believe exists in any other book. I think this is debuting in this book. So Metagosans, the species of that planet, would naturally not exist anywhere else either. They're a reptilian species, much like the Trandoshans, just different reptiles. But they are making a debut in this book as well. Nothing else that really struck out to me to find out if they exist in other books. That was pretty much it. So now we'll move on to the things that I found interesting in this book. Mace Windu is described with having flamed eyes in the first chapter of this book, which is kind of like a precursor to the rest of the book, where he talks about trying to meet up with Chulak and fighting them. And when I read it, I thought, what, Sith eyes? Like he has flamed eyes like the Sith? Which I feel like Disney is more and more trying to inch towards this idea that Mace Windu does teeter on the dark and the light, which this book very explicitly says he does. But it's weird messaging compared to what we've known to be true in the past, which was that Mace had some dark tendencies. I don't know that it ever explicitly says that he uses the dark side, but this is probably the closest I've seen to him using the dark side as it's being described. At one point in the book, Mace Windu was recalling a statement that Qui-Gon made to him one time where he said, turn pain into power. He was trying to lift him up from a point of, if you're in pain, you need to use that to your advantage and overcome it to win out the situation, whatever that may be. It reminded me of the Sith code, to be honest with you. The code goes through strength I gain power. It's also seen that there's other Sith Lords that use pain to anger them and deepen their connection to the dark side. Bane did it, Vader did it, a ton of other Sith Lords did it. I just don't understand how they would attribute that kind of a quote to Qui-Gon. But if they believe that they can use this in a positive way and not use it for dark, then I suppose it makes sense, but context just seemed kind of weird to me. Mace Windu once said, Jedi do not ignore their feelings, they integrate them, own them. They fear, but they are not afraid of their fear. They grow angry, but they allow their anger to motivate only honorable action. Do you understand? He's saying this while talking to a group of younglings. I just found it interesting because in episode 3, when Anakin is fighting Dooku says,
sense great fear in you, Skywalker. You have hate, you have anger, but you don't use them.
So this might make me believe that this was Anakin's issue. His anger and his fear and his shortcomings of what has happened to him in the past, he never was able to let it flow through him and get over it and allow it to become part of his being so he understands what good to do from it. So perhaps Mace Windu is the culmination of what Anakin could have been, and Anakin obviously could have been even better at it since he was conceived out of midichlorians. Jedi for a long time were known for recruiting infants to be Jedi, or at least kids that were between the ages of like 6 months and 2 years, something like that, because they knew that if they get them really, really young, then they can impress upon them the right mannerisms and ideologies of the Jedi, which a lot of people view as indoctrination. You could definitely view it that way, but the Jedi view it as making sure that there's a less chance of them being corrupted. What they fail to realize is that the Jedi, especially ones that have turned to the dark side, because they're being deprived of a childhood experience, that's something that's going to be suppressed for the rest of their life. That's something that they will never get to experience ever again. This kind of points to why the Jedi were unsustainable in the first place, at least the way that the Order was operating at the time. It's just another reason why. We see later that there's several people that are Bakken trained Jedi that trained when they were much older, and they turned out to be good people with good hearts, and they continued the practice of the Jedi, even though they've experienced a lot before they started their training. Chu Lok, one of the crime lords of Metagos, has a staff that is wrapped in Zillo Beast hide, which is extremely interesting because, number one, and we know the Zillo Beast isn't extinct because it appears in the Clone Wars, and this book takes place way before the Clone Wars. It takes place right after episode 1, actually. But how did they get a piece of the Zillo Beast hide? I feel like if there was another instance of the Zillo Beast even coming out and being approached or anything around this time, that should be investigated and stories be told about it, because the Zillo Beast caused an incredible amount of problems in the Clone Wars, something that was not easy to control at all, even with the greatest technology of the Republic. Several times in this book, Mace will refer back to how his anger or his rage is rising, but then he's able to calm it immediately to not exert himself in a dishonorable way in the situation that he's in, obviously to prevent himself from turning to the dark side. But this kind of control that he has over not teetering over, even though he possesses a lot of anger and rage, which they talk about several times, is incredible. And it defeats the notion of when people actually get a taste for this power, they're much more likely to reach for it again. So Mace is able to almost get there and just not use it ever again, or I don't know if he's ever used the dark side at all, but it seems like at some point he might have. The people of Metagos view the Force as the web. That's how it manifests to them, and it's a special power that certain people on the planet are able to connect with stronger than others, just like more sensitive people are in other parts of the galaxy. It almost seems like it's a different kind of power on this planet, because several times Mace refers to certain powers on the planet that are basically screwing with his mind and making him question things, question why he became a Jedi, refer back to his past. He can't sleep. His abilities diminish because of the amount of sleep he gets. He doesn't get any sleep. I have talked about the Force manifesting in different ways to different people on different planets, but as far as the Force acting or reacting in different ways on different planets with different people is something completely different. And it's not a concept that we've seen in other parts. I mean, the Force is what it is, and however you can communicate with the Force is supposedly the way you can communicate it on any planet, from what we've known. And maybe that's the way it is here. This is the first time I've ever seen it act in this way. Mental health is obviously a huge issue in today's society, and there was a quote in this book that I don't know if it was intentional to raise awareness around it, but it was very, very interesting, and I wanted to share it. Mace says, "The path ahead will allow no internal conflict," Mace said. "I cannot fight a war on two levels at once, both internal and external, not any more than Chulok could fight on two fronts at once." He's basically saying that if he can't get his mind right, he's not going to be able to fight anyone physically, which is true for any one of us. If we can't get our mind right today, we're not going to be able to complete the things we need to do tomorrow. That's the way that I interpret it, and if that was the intentional message, then I thought that was awesome to include in the book. Mace is having several nightmares on Metagos, and it's involved with the way that the Force is acting on this planet with regards to his mental health. And someone questions him on it and asks what troubles him about it. And he internally says, "This was touching on an issue that deviled all soldiers with a conscience." In episode 2,
"We're keepers of the peace, not soldiers."
And even in this book, he says that they're not military officers, even though they become exactly that when the Clone Wars starts. So that can only lead in my mind that the Jedi were deceived to such a point that they basically just devolved away from anything that they ever aspired to be, which, wow. Good job, Palpatine. Mace Windu has to fight a lot of people in this book. He mainly fights Sybil's children, which is the big centipede-like creature, the Rurian. But whenever he kills somebody, he invites them to fight him first. And this is a loophole for him because Jedi do not set out to kill. If they're attacked, they defend themselves, and they are prepared to kill somebody if they have to defend themselves. And someone takes notice of this when he's performing tasks with people, and it was a weird trait that they picked up, that he invited people to attack him before he killed them. But he still killed a lot of people, a lot of beings on this planet. And it just seemed like he's killing a lot of people for a mission that Qui-Gon used to act on, something that he was never involved in before, didn't really know the implications of the galaxy, even though there was a slight chance that the crime lords could meet up with the Hutts or something like that, which they are somewhat involved, the Hutts are. Given that he's undercover and killing all these people just to discover the inner workings of the crime lords just seemed uncharacteristic. There was a warrior clan on Harun Kal that killed Mace's parents, and Mace was trying to find out his origins. Did he choose the Jedi, or did his parents give him up? Well, the parents were killed by these warriors, and Mace was left to the rest of the community after these warriors were killed, and the community felt that it was only right for the child to choose the direction that he wanted to go. Now, it doesn't speak to what age he was, but he had to have been, I would imagine, pretty young. But the Jedi did discover him, and it was totally up to him whether he wanted to become part of the Jedi or not. So thus, he was able to discover that this is the path that he wanted to walk all along. Another weird Mace Windu quote, "I dance between the light and the darkness." So this goes even further to say that he may use the dark side, but he says, "I dance between." Does that mean that he's flirting with it, flirting with the dark side to give him extra power while using Vapid, something like that. I don't know. But from everything I knew about the dark side, due to George's explanations of it, it kind of defeats all of that, which I'm totally fine with actually, because I actually like this definition more, especially when it comes to Dawn of the Jedi, the first 25,000 year BBY one. So yeah, it's interesting the depth in this direction that we're going. So we all know now that the prequel Jedi were very arrogant. They believed that they were on the righteous path, and they didn't believe that their positions or their ideologies were compromised at all, even though they pretty clearly were when they're leading a slave army for the Republic. Jedi's role has always been to keep the Republic in the light, and that also involves behaving in a light-sided way, which would mean reducing the amount of war, reducing the amount of killing, but the Jedi just joined right into it. But on an individual level though, when we get to see each Jedi individually, they are honorable beings. So it's interesting when we see them individually how we've grown to like them and understand the choices that they make, but together they did not go in the correct direction. Jedi Vector from the High Republic makes a reappearance in this book, but it is not flown by a Jedi. The attention is brought to how badly that ship is being flown because it's meant for Jedi to fly. And actually remember from the High Republic that you're supposed to put your lightsaber in there to operate the ship, and we know that the weapon systems don't work if you don't put your lightsaber in there. So obviously this ship can't use any weapons unless they retrofitted them. They refer to it as an antique, which is hilarious, but it was 250 years ago, something like that it was used, or 200 years ago. So even though Star Wars spans across thousands of years, I guess you could still call that an antique. We're getting even further into Mace using the dark side. And here's how it reads. Mace Windu delivered justice where there had been no justice. He let flow the anger and the pain and the fear and all of the emotions that had been inside for so long but been blocked by his concern for himself. Now it was all right here. He was Mace Windu, Jedi Master, and he owned the dark. He owned the dark. So he's literally a dark side Jedi. He's not a dark Jedi. He's not selfish. He uses his power for others. He acts in the way that a Jedi should act, but he owns the dark. Just someone else explain it to me, please. And the last thing I found interesting is Yoda gave a quote in this book that definitely foreshadows the Clone Wars, since this takes place 10 years prior. But he says, "Wait not for the allies you wish, fight you must with the allies you have." This is kind of a dangerous quote, especially for the Grand Master to make. Wait not for the allies you wish, but fight with the allies you have. We've seen in other books, and I can't remember if it was a canon book or not, but that Yoda fought or brought in a former Jedi who was now a dark Jedi that was still practicing the dark arts to help them fight. I think it was in the High Republic actually, to fight against an opponent of theirs. It might have been the Nile. I can't remember. So it seems like he holds true that there might be someone in front of you that you don't wish to align with, but if they share a common goal, then you should ally with them to accomplish the goal that you want to accomplish. I don't necessarily know if it's un-Jedi-like. I'm sure there's a lot of purists who would consider it so. That was the last thing that I found interesting in this book. Very much enjoyed it. Like I said before, it seemed contrived because it takes place right after episode 1, after Qui-Gon died, but Qui-Gon just happened to visit this planet occasionally to protect this clan of people, and now he needs Mace to visit this planet also. And there wasn't really a super clear inclination that Mace and Qui-Gon were super close. It makes sense when they talk about it in the book, but it's not something I ever got before that they were super close, but that's the narrative that the author created, that Stephen Barnes created. So I'm okay with it. And like I said, I enjoyed the book. There was a lot of cool concepts. Metagos is a crazy planet. There's sunstorms that make everything glass on top, and there's several levels of beings that underground that do different things in the book. So I enjoyed reading it. I'm going to give this book an 8.6, and only because of its disconnection to anything really strongly related to the main storyline of the episodes. I said before, if there's a strong connection, that's going to get a higher score for me. It was a really good book, so I think an 8.6 is a pretty good score. And if there was something that connected it to a line or something that could have warranted further explanation, I would have given it a higher score. But 8.6, that's a review. I appreciate everybody that showed up to watch the review today, and may the force be with you. Everybody have a great rest of your day. Thank you.